We're grateful that you all have chosen to spend your early Friday morning with us. This might be the only portion of the day where I'm not just itching to be outside, because I think it's going to be another 78-degree day. For those who are just joining us, we're just going to allow folks to have a few minutes to get onto the call this morning, and then we will get started. So sit tight for just a moment. Okay. I think we can go ahead and get started here. Well, again, thank you all for choosing to spend your Friday morning with us. I'm Grace Evans-Pettigrew from One Neighborhood Builders. We launched this Fresh Fridays series to create space for practitioners, community members, policymakers, and all other interested folks to learn and share about community development. Especially topics that are really core to the work of community development, like that which we will discuss today, which is really around housing and ensuring individuals and families can remain stably housed. Before we get started, just a few quick notes on logistics for the day. First, we will be recording this session as we intend to share it with interested individuals who were not able to join us this morning. Second, if you have any questions or comments while one of our panelists is speaking, please feel free to leave it in the chat function in Zoom, and we'll try to incorporate it into the session. We will also have an open Q&A towards the end of our time together, during which you will also be able to come off of mute and have the floor to ask a question in that fashion. Third, we want to remind you that if you hear a phrase or an acronym that you aren't familiar with, we encourage you to ask about it in the chat. My colleague, Ali Steinberg, who's here on the call from One Neighborhood Builders, will be watching the chat and will be able to jump in to explain and translate if she's able. This is really a space for learning, so we encourage you to use it as much. And fourth and finally, would love to have a sense of who is in the room. So please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat. Feel free to share your name, why you're joining us, where you're joining us from, anything that will remind us that we're kind of here in community with others who are interested in this conversation. So today, we're going to focus on affordable housing, as I mentioned, and we're going to hear from affordable housing providers on their efforts to support residents in remaining stably housed. So we will frame this conversation around preventing evictions that are due to non-payment of rent. As many people know who are on this call, there are many reasons why an individual or family may face eviction, and we recognize that this conversation isn't going to cover all situations or circumstances. So we're taking sort of a narrow slice in the hopes that we can have a really robust conversation with a few practitioners in the field. But of course, we acknowledge that there's lots of things that can't be covered in 45 minutes, and we encourage folks to ask questions or in the survey that you will receive at the end of the session today to note if there's other topics or versions of this topic that you'd like to hear more about in the future. So to kick us off, we will have our three panelists who are going to introduce themselves in just a moment here to talk a little bit about themselves, their organization, and the philosophy that guides their work. So to kick us off, I'm going to ask Breah Anderson from House of Hope to get started.
Thank you, Grace. It's wonderful to be here today with all of you. My name is Breah Anderson. I am the Director of Housing with House of Hope. Our main offices are located in Warwick, but our work is statewide. So we are a homeless service provider and affordable housing developer. We believe that housing is a basic human right, and we certainly advocate for diverse, innovative housing options for our constituents. We center a lot, most of our work around constituents and empowering them and constituent choice. We have a street outreach program that engages with folks that are literally on the streets experiencing homelessness. We also have our mobile shower unit, Shower to Empower, that is in 4 different cities now. It's in Providence, West Warwick, Woonsocket, and Pawtucket. We also have a peer mentor employment training program, which is for folks with lived experience to help move towards maybe becoming a certified peer recovery specialist or a community health worker. So I oversee our housing programs, and we have around 300 households in our housing programs in various scenarios, where we own and operate that property, where we lease up with private landlords, and then we're also in partnerships with other developers and property managers where we are the service provider.
Thank you very much, Breah. And we'll have a chance to dig into lots of those details as we move forward here. But I'd like to ask our second panelist to introduce themselves. Lauren Legocki, from POAH. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Grace, and good morning, everyone. Yes, I am with POAH. My name is Lauren Legocki, and for anyone who doesn't know, we were just talking about acronyms earlier. So POAH is Preservation of Affordable Housing. You can kind of see some of our stats on the slide here, but we operate in 11 states and DC. We're an owner, developer, and manager of affordable housing. And, the way that I work in this organization is in community impact, which is what we call resident services. And we serve, just to talk a little bit about our portfolio, about half of the residents we serve live in family tenancy housing, which just means it's not age restricted. So a lot of families or single people. And then in the other half is elderly tenancy, which is age restricted. So it's usually folks that are 62 or older. And yeah, community impact, POAH works really hard to develop and lease affordable housing, but we also know that we'll talk more about this later. Stable housing is so important, but the idea is that once someone's in stable housing, you can work with them on the goals that they create for themselves and help them access opportunity in their local community. So that is really where community impact comes in. And so we are embedded with property management. We're not separate from property management, and that kind of allows us to work really collaboratively with our property managers, especially on the topic that we're going to talk about today. My role, so I support our East Coast portfolio. That is staff that work in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Florida. So definitely a broad range of states we're working in. And really, I'm just here to provide support to the CICs who are working in the communities, help them troubleshoot different scenarios and access resources to support residents. I'm really excited to be here today. Thanks, Grace.
Thank you, Lauren. And now for our final panelist today, I will pass it to my colleague, Bancroft Soto. Bancroft, if you are there and speaking, we cannot hear you.
I apologize. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
The dreaded mute button. I'll start again. Thank you, Grace. Very happy to be with you and everyone. I'm Bancroft Soto, proud member of the One Neighborhood Builders team as their asset manager. As many of you know, One Neighborhood Builders is a nonprofit community development organization. We're the owner and operator of deed restricted affordable housing throughout Providence and now Greater Providence. We have expanded our reach beyond Providence to a heavy footprint in East Providence, Central Falls, Cumberland. We have a robust pipeline of units. I'm very excited about what's to come. We do work at the intersection of housing and health. We marry owning and operating these units with a robust supportive services operation focused on the needs of the community. It's a wonderful organization to be a part of, and I'm happy to have this conversation with everyone here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Really great to have this initial introduction from each of you. We're going to remove the slides here so we can all see each other's beautiful faces to continue the conversation. I'm going to ask Breah the first question, just to dig a little deeper on some of the things you mentioned during your introductory comments. Could you, Breah, talk a little bit about what eviction prevention looks like to House of Hope and to you and your team, and how you see that relating to the principles of housing first?
Yeah, so we center all of our work. We are a housing first agency. So all of our work is sort of centered around meeting a constituent where they're at and sort of working with them at the pace that they're ready and willing and able to go. Along with sort of when we're developing any sort of case plan with folks around what their goals are, we really want them to be part of that conversation and have realistic case plans that people want to partake in. So sometimes it can be a little bit challenging because you might see from the outside things that are complicating someone's world, but they're just not ready to work on them right now. That's just not where they're at. They just don't have the capacity to engage in that at that time, and that's okay. Along with sort of housing first, we really take a harm reduction approach to our work, and that's one of the 8 principles of housing first. And so we really want to reduce anyone being evicted from their unit, right? We know what an eviction on somebody's record can do. So when we're working with folks in this lane of non-payment of rent, our work, we really want to have strong relationships, not only with our constituents, but with landlords and property managers. And in some places that is happening internally because we're working with our property manager internally. And in other scenarios, we're working with private landlords and developers and property managers. And so from the very beginning, we're incorporating landlords and property managers as someone's moving into housing so that we can have this really strong open dialogue, and we're having conversations about how much constituents and landlords are wanting and willing and able to share with each other. Creating those relationships helps us down the road when we do get to places where someone might miss their rent payment. And there's a lot of reasons why someone might miss their rent payment. And so the case management team is meeting with folks at a minimum a weekly basis, sometimes often more. And when someone misses their rent, we're having conversations around like why. Like, I understand, maybe you had a bill to pay, or maybe you had a choice to make and you made a choice other than paying your rent. And so we want to figure out what happened. And then we want to try to work with them to create strategies of how we can reduce that from happening again, and have communications with the landlord or the property manager that we're working on that this was the scenario. Maybe we're talking about repayment plans, or payment plans, so they're going to pay their rent and then pay a little bit extra each month. But depending how many times we do get to a place of missing a rent payment, we might be having different dialogue around the need for a rep payee. And as House of Hope, we have very honest budgets with folks. We talk about what money folks have coming in and what they want to spend their money on. And when I say that we have honest budgets, if somebody is drinking, if someone is using, well, we want a budget for that because we know you're going to spend your money on that, but we do want to ensure that your rent is getting paid. And so when we're talking about a rep payee service, we're talking about, we want to ensure that your rent and your utilities get paid, and then you have this money to do whatever else you want to do with. And so that's how we look at this work. If we just get to a place where we're continually in this pattern, and there might be viable reasons that we're in this pattern, but it might get to the point where we need to sort of maybe talk about vacating a unit and trying a new strategy. But with this relationship and dialogue we have going, it's a group effort when we're addressing these issues.
Thank you so much, Breah. And I mean, I heard a few things there, including just the importance of relationship building with residents and really understanding the importance of trust as the foundation of any conversation about challenges related to payment of rent. You also talked a little bit about the relationship that you and your team have with both landlords and property managers. And I think this is going to come up a little bit more in our conversation. So I want to spend just, maybe 10 or 20 seconds with a note on this. At House of Hope, you both own and manage property through a property management firm. So House of Hope's contracts with a property management firm to basically serve as the landlord. And you also work with private landlords and supporting folks that you're working with and getting access to that housing. At both POAH and One Neighborhood Builders, as we'll talk about a little bit more, we also own and manage housing, and then contract with a property management firm to play that landlord role. So that's how the kind of the pieces fit together here, and looks slightly different at House of Hope and at the other two organizations. And I'll lean on my panelists here to explain that even further. And to that point, I'd like to ask Lauren the next question here, which is POAH, as you described in the opening comments, works at a really significant scale. So working across 11 states, has more than 13,000 units. And you mentioned your role in sort of playing this support and kind of resource role to resident services across different developments, different homes where folks live. Can you talk about what that looks like to provide that services and supports to folks who are doing the on-the-ground work? And maybe if you can describe what that looks like to work also with your property management team and places where that, all the interests are aligned and times that maybe tensions arise.
Absolutely, sure. Yeah, and I can, just to set the scene for what the entities look like. So there's POAH, who's the owner developer, and then POAH Communities, who's actually technically the company I work for, is the subsidiary, the property management subsidiary of POAH. But it's very, very intertwined. We all work together in the same offices in our central office. And it very much feels like property management is sort of in-house. And then in our property management organization, we have resident services, community impact. So we're working alongside our property management colleagues. And I can't stress enough how important that relational element is, being able to pick up the phone and call one of the regional property supervisors who oversee a subset of property managers and properties within our portfolio to really talk about the unique circumstances that might be surfacing at a particular community at that time, and problem solve with them and the property manager and the CIC that's based in the community. So yeah, I think that level of collaboration, that's a huge value add in our work. And kind of segueing into your question, Grace, I think that housing stability for POAH, so community impact, and in some ways, some of our audience is looking for, outcomes that we can measure that show economic mobility and positive health outcomes. And those are goals and priorities for us, but we can't do any of that work well if the residents we're trying to serve are worried about getting evicted, or worried about a lease violation that they received, or paying their next rent bill. So housing stability is really at the foundation of everything that community impact can do. It's really hard to recruit someone to come to a job fair that we put together, or to talk to us about summer camp for their child if, you know, they're in the back of their mind worried about the notice to quit they got, or how they're going to pay rent for next month. So housing stability, if you look at all of our training materials for CICs, it's the foundation of everything we do. And eviction prevention obviously is like our main strategy for that. And, you know, the way that looks with working with property management, eviction prevention for non-payment of rent for us is very cyclical, because rent is due every single month. So we really look at each month and we divide it into 3 sections. There's prevention, intervention, and follow-up. So during our grace period, you know, rent is due on the 1st of the month, but residents have until the 5th before it's considered late. So during that grace period, CICs are doing a lot of legwork, just reminding folks gently, friendly reminders posted up around the community. If there's someone that they know hasn't been able to pay rent for the last couple of months and we're working with them already, they might do a follow-up, or they might already have a plan in place and they're following those steps. And then after that grace period ends, the property manager and CIC communicate really closely. They're sharing delinquency reports so that the CIC can see, okay, who's officially late? Who do I need to follow up with? Who's already on a repayment agreement? And from there, it's triaging. So it's, you know, we are able, because we work with property management and on the property management team, we can see and kind of figure out pretty quickly who might qualify for rent assistance or who might not. So the majority of the subsidy at our properties are either project-based Section 8 or the tax credit program. So, you know, the CIC is working to say, okay, like, I think I can reach out to these folks, ask them how they're doing, ask them what's going on, to what Breah was saying, and then also have these resources ready to offer. Or if it can't be rental assistance, then we're talking about a repayment agreement, which we always offer. So then those next 2 weeks really just look like it's a lot of outreach, because people are busy. People, you know, it's leaving voicemails. It's maybe sending a friendly letter or a gentle email, really whatever works for that resident or that community. And then towards the end of the month, you know, affordable housing is such a compliance-driven industry, and that's well-meaning, but in practice, it can be harm. It can cause harm. It can inadvertently stress a lot of residents out and our staff out. So those notice to quits do have to go out every month, because, you know, for fair housing reasons, but hopefully, you know, the property manager and the CIC have cultivated enough trust with residents that they understand, for in some states, having a notice to quit is what gets you access to rental assistance. So it's really, I can't stress enough how much communication between the CIC and the property manager are an ingredient to kind of success in eviction prevention, and then definitely trust building with the community as a whole, so that, you know, folks are not surprised when we're reaching out and offering them rental assistance, or reaching out and wanting to talk to them about their missed rent payment, which is a really vulnerable and kind of personal, anything to do with anyone's finances or housing is going to be a personal place to be. So that trust is so important.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And Dominic, I see your question. I'm going to ask Bancroft to answer one question first, and then we'll come back around to you. Thanks for raising your hand. Bancroft, at One Neighborhood Builders, as you mentioned, you know, you lead our asset management work, and work really closely with our resident services team on eviction prevention and managing delinquency of rent. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like at One Neighborhood Builders, and some of the things that you and the team have found to be really successful at advancing that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, from an asset management perspective in particular, you know, this issue represents twin horrors. On the one hand, the prospect of evicting a household is extremely painful. I'm well aware, we're all well aware of the devastating impact that has in human terms. But on the other hand, we have to contend with what I call the delinquency dragon, because it's absolutely ruinous and burns up your net operating income jeopardizing the operations and viability of a property. So we have to work at, balancing two interests. So from our experience, I'll provide a little context. When I joined 1NB last year, we were onboarding a new property manager. So we had a fresh set of eyes on all aspects of operations. And as we were peeling the many-layered onion, we found this massive dragon lurking in the financials. It was a delinquency number that was 12% of gross receipts, just north of 600,000. So after sounding the alarm, we assembled the interdepartmental task force and began the work of balancing those divergent interests. And so we ended up crafting a policy that had 5 buckets to it, detailing how we approach particular scenarios. And as I was listening to Lauren, I heard a lot of parallels in terms of what they're doing and what we've ended up doing. So for example, taking it, narratively in the very beginning, if you're late, we do send that, friendly reminder. We're very conscious of how that letter is worded, and then we give them to the 16th, at which point we do have to send that sort of demand notice. And that opened up, at least when we were doing the bulk of this work, a 30-day window to cure. And it was during that period that we dispatched supportive services staff to engage, on an intensive level outreach and support. What we became cognizant of is that every household has a story, every individual has a story, and we wanted to be there to listen, to engage and to adjust as needed, and to marry a broader policy with intense individualized engagement and to build relationships and trust. So, during this window, we offer generous in-house repayment agreements up to 12 months. Should the tenant default, we naturally had to refer, the tenant to counsel, but with strict instructions to prioritize court-stipulated agreements that were equally as generous as the in-house agreements, all the while providing a member of staff, support to this individual. If for some reason we got to the unfortunate state where the stipulated agreement was violated, we wanted to then ensure that this tenant did not have an eviction on the record, right? So we worked very hard at, hey, it might be a time where you have to voluntarily move out, but we want to do that in a way where you don't have this scarlet letter that could, devastate you down the road. We also, on top of this, had this policy of not cost burden. So we spent a lot of time understanding the income situation of the tenant and ensuring that our rents were adjusted in a way where we weren't cost burdening folks. That was a major initiative. So, all of this, really highlights to me, the power of engagement and that human touch. It really does go a long way, coupled with very clear communication. At this time, naturally, we were quite concerned with the potential for a high number of evictions, given that a third of our portfolio was sort of in this category being analyzed. But we, through these efforts, we've had some success. Our delinquency number went from 12% of gross receipts down to 4%, and we totaled 4 executed evictions, which is far below what we thought would happen. Unfortunately, unavoidable. But that's in the totality in the scheme of what we're dealing with, quite a low number. So we've had very, very good results with this approach.
Thank you so much, Bancroft. I felt like that was a nice flow. We went from like the big picture philosophy and got a little more specific as we went along. I'm sure folks have questions. I'm gonna allow Dominic to ask a question as he's been waiting so patiently. If other folks have questions as well, feel free to start populating the chat, or we'll allow folks to come off mute. I also have a few more questions that I might sprinkle in, but I'll hand it to Dominic first.
So first, thank you very much to the panel. A great topic, and really appreciate your time. I spent 20 years in the hospital setting, and the people responsible for collecting money due the hospital reported to me. And I kind of liken it to the same level of challenge and difficulty where an essential service you have to try to collect for, and it almost doesn't seem right that, you know, you'd collect for healthcare and put people in a difficult position. My question is, I had real challenges retaining staff who were in those positions because there's a level of mental, psychological burnout that this type of work is really, really difficult. So my question is, how do you manage your staff in a way that keeps you from just losing people just as they get talented and skilled in these communication discussions with people who are in difficult straits? How do you recruit and how do you retain people in those really high type of burnout situations?
Thank you, Dominic. I would love to hear Breah's response to this first, if you don't mind jumping in.
Sure. I think it's a real challenge. I think workforce capacity is a challenge, very much so now. In our work, we create lots of spaces for case conferencing and supervision. So as a team, we're coming together once a week. People are also having individual supervision on a biweekly basis or sometimes a weekly basis. There are also, we have a couple of different types of buckets of housing where we have folks all housed on in one site, and we would call that a congregate setting. And then we have housing that's scattered throughout the state, and we would call that community-based housing. And so these two branches are also meeting on a biweekly basis. And then we also have forums where team members can reach out to other team members to sort of say, like, hey, I've got something going on, I need help, can I pick somebody's brain about this? So we have a lot of that, but then we also encourage a lot of self-care. It's okay to say, you know what, today is, I need a day, I can't come in today. And we lean on our team and support our teammates. And so we work with people to identify when they need to step back. And we can appreciate when somebody says they need to step back and take some time. Because you're right, this work is really hard. Doing housing first work is really hard. The acuity of our constituents is at a level that I've never seen before. And so I really feel like our case managers are working with issues at times that they're just not meant to have to be working through. Like, they're not counselors, they're not therapists, but they're being placed into these situations. And so we've really also increased training opportunities and access to training opportunities, so that folks feel like they have the tools. And it's not perfect. We certainly have people that have burned out on us before. We've implemented and increased these strategies over the last couple of years, and we've been able to retain staff pretty well with these strategies. But it does mean that sometimes people are going on stress leave for a couple of months, and that's what they need to do, and that's okay. Like, we'll cover it. You take care of you, come back well. But that does still happen.
Thank you, Breah, and thank you, Dominic, for the question. And I think this question really gets at one of the things Breah started our conversation with, which was the importance of relationship building, which means the importance of individual humans really being at the center of the connection with residents, building those relationships, building the trust. And of course, this is this last question is an example of, I think, the toll that can take, but we've heard from everyone on the panel here how important that is also to the success of the residents ultimately remaining stably housed. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Allie, who will facilitate open Q&A. So this is for any of the members of the panel here. if you were to provide some advice or guidance or just some of your own learnings to other landlords, whether they be affordable housing providers or other private landlords who are interested in supporting folks in remaining stably housed, what advice or what takeaways might you share?
I can jump in here. I think kind of tying into Dominic's question and Breah's really great responses. I think what I've learned over the last 10 years is that property management work is just so challenging for so many different reasons for staff. And that will always affect residents. Like if we have staff that are chronically stressed out or experiencing secondary trauma, then they aren't going to be able to deliver the level of customer service and support that residents deserve. So I think focusing on the wellness of staff, and wellness could mean any number of things in this context, but just I think all of our central office departments really exist to try to support one way or another the staff that are based in the communities who are interacting with residents every single day. So in the context of eviction prevention and just communication with residents in general, one thing that we've done, just have like a concrete example, resident communications in general, and we're a big company with tons of properties, and we just realized that it was a lot to put on our property management staff on the ground to constantly be drafting letters in these different scenarios. So we undertook a project to draft communication templates that are plug and play for different scenarios. And it's taken a while. It sounds kind of simple, but when you get into it, it's tough. So we have letter templates we have soft letter templates for that you're sending to households who have missed a rent payment before the notice to quit goes out. And we have like 3 different versions of that because you want to give staff choice and flexibility in how they're communicating to residents, but it's also helpful for them to just not have to reinvent the wheel every time they want to send a new letter. And then when incidents happen in the community, whether that's like a fire or a police response or the death of a resident or something like that, we have lots of different letter templates for that. So just finding ways to, like, one thing I feel like we're focusing on right now is finding ways to make the job of property management, whatever role someone has, whether it's in resident services or maintenance or property management, trying to make that less crushing. Like it's just, I said this earlier, it's a compliance driven industry. So there's just a whole paperwork aspect of those roles and the human aspect of, interacting, that compassion fatigue that develops over time. All of these things are kind of like coming together at once. So I think the advice I can offer is just really looking for ways to support staff to take that constant like drain on their energy and their patience stores and all of that, just trying to make the role simpler in this like very complex industry.
If I
Thank
can
you so
just
much.
add
Please.
a little bit to that, please. So I think those are great strategies. I also think as I've been doing this work, it's a little bit of a philosophical approach to it, but as I've been doing this work, I've evaluated what I've considered a win. I think I used to have this perspective of what success should look like and what it means that we're improving or moving forward. But over the course of doing this work, I've really learned that wins look different. And they can be really small and they can be really big. But to celebrate all of those, because they do kind of help you keep moving forward and they help recharging you to find that brain space to reevaluate, okay, we're going to create different templates for our team and things like that. And so that would be my advice. And anybody new that joins us, these are conversations that we're having in the very beginning of like recentering what you consider a win and success.
Yeah, I like that comment. I think everything that's been said has been spot on, and I certainly want to reinforce all that. I mean, staff wellness is absolutely key. Training is important, absolutely. Being reminded of the broader mission, I find myself doing that a lot. So you were talking about the individual sort of motivations, let's say, those small wins, those will stack up, those will compound if you focus on them. That's really key. But they fit in, they plug into this broader mission that you're passionate about. That's why you're here, right? Let's not forget that. And everything you're doing is in furtherance of that. And so we're going to trudge forward together, right? You're not alone. This is truly a team, and we have each other's back, and we understand, what each other needs, right? We're all individuals. What motivates you? What do you need today? I know that because I've been in the trenches with you, and likewise, it's just it's just an art. It's just an art that you develop, and we're lucky enough to have a good group of folks that are really passionate and smart and care about each other and care about what they're doing. And then when you feel that togetherness, I think that really helps propel you forward.
Thank you so much. We only have a few minutes left, but if anyone has any questions, please feel free to come off mute and just shout them out, or leave a question in the chat.
I saw there's one question in the chat from Eliza on, I think this is a reference to when Bancroft was talking about referring people to counsel. Who was that? Is that RILS, which is Rhode Island Legal Services? Bancroft, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I'll clarify that, absolutely. When I was talking about referring to counsel, I meant counsel who is charged with sort of the eviction process, right? So we were talking about a point in time where, we sent out the reminder letters, the demand notice, resident services is engaged, helping with budgeting and the individual needs of that particular household. There was an in-house agreement that was generous, it was violated. And then now we're going into a stage where we want to get a stipulated agreement in the court system that maybe has some teeth, because we do have to be cognizant of sort of the delinquency issue. But at that point, we're talking about stipulated agreement that's generous. But at that point, that's guided by our attorney. So that's what I was referring to.
You mind me asking what law firm you work with?
It's an individual. It's Paul Rogusta.
Okay, thank you. He's also, interestingly, a housing court judge in Providence, where they do the conditions. Yeah, thank you.
Any additional questions from folks on the call here?
I see there's one in the chat as well. Is there free counsel services for people faced with foreclosure? So foreclosure is a different issue. But
Rhode Island Legal Services does have a foreclosure unit. Attorney Michael Zablin is somebody at Rhode Island Legal Services who does that foreclosure work.
Michael, okay, hi, my name is Christina. I asked the question. So Michael Zablin, and does he work out of the Providence office?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's Zabelin.
Thank you for that resource.
Sure.
However, I would suggest to first contact a HUD-approved housing counselor for your foreclosure prevention or any other client. Right now, there's one HUD-approved housing counseling agency in the state, and that's NeighborWorks, Blackstone River Valley. They do their services online or in person. But if there's any foreclosure, before paying a lawyer, let's go to a HUD-approved housing counselor. They have the power, the knowledge, and the certification to work foreclosure.
Thank you so much.
Yes, my lady.
Thank you, Eliza, Christina, and Rosa, all for jumping in. I'm grateful to see that this can be a space for folks to share resources and connect with each other. I see Brenda Clement has her hand up, and we might have to give Brenda the last word here as we're reaching 9:30.
Boy, lots of pressure. Sorry about that. So foreclosure, thank you for raising HUD counseling. Rhode Island Housing has a small program that's closed now, but may be reopening again around foreclosure assistance. So just something to keep on flag there. But I just would love folks' comments, and I'm very glad this conversation is focusing on prevention, because oftentimes by the time you get to court, it's too late. But what's rent relief and rental assistance programs, particularly POAH, who works across other states, how important is it to have that access to kind of prevention dollars and prevention money, and how can we get that in Rhode Island?
Yeah, I know Rent Relief Rhode Island was a lifeline during COVID, and those state-based rental assistance resources were popping up in all the states we operate during COVID, and that was incredible. But now we've seen sort of a contraction of either eligibility requirements or just money available. So that has vastly changed the residents we're working with, like what their options and outlook looks like. And so I would say it is so important. I'm based in Boston, so Massachusetts has the RAFT program, which existed before COVID and was great during COVID, and is still here today. So I'm really grateful that the state of Massachusetts has that. But other states we work in have nothing, or the eligibility requirements are really narrow, and that's created a challenge. So then now we're going back to sort of like the Catholic Charities, St. Vincent de Paul, or just sort of communities of faith that have set up, or other community action agencies that have set up smaller rental assistance programs, and those are also play a really important role. But the state-based programs, those were wonderful. I know they were set up and funded through the COVID relief funding, but it's so important. It was such an important piece of eviction prevention there was an eviction moratorium during COVID, but helping people get back on track and catch up, so that they weren't at risk when those moratoriums ended. So yeah, I hope that we could learn our lesson from COVID, and that states can see the importance of funding housing stability in that way.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you, Brenda, for that question. And I know as we wrap up here, I'll note One Neighborhood Builders, and I know House of Hope also hugely appreciated the availability of rent relief resources, and couldn't agree more with the idea of seeking out additional opportunities to grow that pie for the future. Thank you all so much for joining this session this morning. They always go so fast, but hopefully that makes them accessible for folks as they're joining and kicking off their Friday morning. So as a few just final notes, which is that as you leave the Zoom this morning, in your web browser on whatever device you're on, will pop up a little survey. We'd love if you would take a minute or two to complete it. It helps us know if this is providing value, and also we get a sense of other topics that you might be interested in hearing about or speaking with folks about in the future. Look out for our announcement for our next Fresh Friday, which will be in December 1st, topic forthcoming. So we'll keep you on your toes in terms of the details of that. But if you've attended this, we'll make sure you get information so that you can choose to participate in a future session if you so choose. Thank you all so much. Have a great Friday.
Thank you.